Hello everybody, my name is Chantal Wright. I teach literary translation in the Warwick Writing Programme at the University of Warwick. I also happen to be a literary translator. I translate from French and German into English. I translate prose, poetry, children's books and scholarly texts. One of the ways in which I understand my role at the university is to be an advocate for translation as a profession and as a practice. So what I'm going to do today, instead of talking about my research specifically, is I'm going to assume that the world of literary translation is a mystery for many people watching this short video, and I'm therefore going to offer you a guide to literary translation for the perplexed, the curious, and the uninitiated. So without further ado, here is that guide. First stop on our guide. Translators are not interpreters. This is a common mistake that people make. You often hear people talking about translators when they mean interpreters. The basic difference is interpreters are the people who stand in the booths at the UN, translating conferences. They're the people who whisper in the ear of people like Vladimir Putin and Boris Johnson when they meet foreign leaders. Their work is oral. Translators deal with written texts. There are lots of different kinds of translation, and the world of literary translation is all about the translation of literature. So this may appear mysterious, but if you are a reader and you like to read books, then chances are you have read a literary translation at some point. I'm just going to do a quick show and tell here. So translation from the Japanese, translation from the Turkish, translation from the Japanese and a Nobel Prize winner. Three Musketeers needs no introduction, translated from French. Tin Drum, translated from German. Murakami, again, translated from Japanese. Elena Ferrante, one of the big hits of the last few years, translated from Italian. Natalia Ginzburg, again, translated from Italian. Homer, of course. Tolstoy, Primo Levi, and finally in my show and tell, The Eighth Life. So it's likely that at some point in your life you have come across a literary translation, even if you weren't aware of the fact that you were reading one, which brings me to the next of my post-it notes here. Hashtag Name the Translator. This is an actual hashtag and reflects a campaign that is ongoing among literary translators in Britain, which is a campaign to put the name of the translator on the front cover of books. If you've read a literary translation and you weren't aware of the fact that you were doing so, chances are it's because the book was not labelled as a literary translation. Perhaps the name of the translator was not on the front cover. The name of the translator will probably have been inside the cover somewhere, but you would have to look for it. So this campaign, Name the Translator, is there to bring about greater visibility for translators, to make people more aware of the fact that they're reading translations, and to give credit where credit's due. Just in the same way that when you see film credits roll at the end of a film, everybody is credited, it seems only fair to credit the person who brought this book to you, or this collection of poetry, perhaps also this theatre play in English. Why else is it important to name the translator? Well, when you pick up a translation, you're picking up a very different kind of book. It's a book that's been written by two people, essentially, sometimes by more than two people if there's more than one translator involved. Reviewers are very fond of saying things like, to give you an example, as Elena Ferrante states so elegantly, quote, Tolstoy famously said in War and Peace, quote, the problem with statements like that is that Elena Ferrante doesn't write her novels in English. Tolstoy wrote his novels in Russian. The person who brings these books to you in English is, in fact, the translator. Tolstoy didn't write a word of his novels in in English. So it's his various translators over the course of the last century that bring his words to you. So it's important to acknowledge that this other person has been involved in the creation of the book that you're reading, and that person who brings the book to you is not Google Translate. It's not a program through which, you know, the novel has been run, or the collection of poetry. It's a person who has sat down and read the book, thought about it, had a reading experience with that book, the same way that you have a reading experience when you sit down with a book. And they've then produced a translation on the basis of the experience that they've had with that text. So translators are people, not machines. Translators come with their own library in their head of books that they've read. They come with their own vocabulary. They come with their own set of experiences, their own context, the life that they've led. And all of this goes into the reading of a book, just as when you pick up a book, all of your life experiences, all of the books that you've previously read, the particular vocabulary that you have, you bring all that to bear when you read. And translators do that too. The difference is that when you read a book, or when a non-translating reader reads a book, they don't have to act on their reading experience in the same way that a translator does. A translator reads a book and then has to go away and do something with their reading experience. They have to create a new book in English on the basis of their reading. So that's why it's important to name the translator, because there's this highly subjective person, subjective in the most positive sense of the word, who's been involved in creating this book that you read. Not a neutral person, and that wouldn't be desirable either. A living, breathing person made of flesh, who is bringing their particular reading to you. This brings me to my next topic, which is high fidelity, ? There's lots of talk in reviews of translations about whether or not a translation is faithful, or whether it displays fidelity. Faithfulness and fidelity are very, very problematic words when it comes to translation. Faithful to what? Faithful to whom? Are the questions that need to be asked. We all know that literary works, whether they are novels or collections of poetry or play texts, literary non-fiction as well, are complicated beasts. One of the reasons why we enjoy reading so much is that literary texts are complex. They have multiple meanings in them. There are lots of different ways you can read them. They're not always straightforward. That's part of the pleasure. That's part of the pleasure of reading. If you give a book to different readers, they will undoubtedly have different opinions and see different things. And that's why fidelity is such a problematic concept. It's difficult to know what you're being faithful to exactly, because different people will see different things in the text. So in a sense, all you can be faithful to is your own reading of something. Okay, this brings me to my next point, which is unlost in translation. Lost in translation is a cliche, and it's a cliche that you hear and read a lot when people talk about translations. If there's something in a translation that makes somebody uneasy, something that they don't recognise, or they haven't seen before, then reviewers and readers have a tendency to say, perhaps, rather grandly, perhaps something got lost in translation, without knowing actually what that means, or knowing with any certainty if anything has got lost, because most people who use that phrase to talk about translations won't be able to read the Japanese original text or the Chinese original text. I think that we should stop using the phrase "lost in translation." I think it should potentially be banned, and that we should find more creative ways of thinking and talking about translations. Translations actually only bring us gain. They give us access to things that we wouldn't otherwise have access to, books from other worlds, from languages that we will never ever learn. So if we think of translation as offering us this great wealth of riches, this access to the rest of the world, then if we work from that premise alone, there can be no loss in translation. There is only gain in translation. I'm going to finish today, and finally, with a poem on that very theme of unlost in translation. This is a poem by a Bulgarian-German poet called Sveta Sofronieva, and the translation into English is mine. And it's called Unlost in Translation. The window at the front and right of my compartment reflects the scene on the left at my rear. I can see what is passing, superimposed on what is coming, and it is as though the light likes this game, irrespective of where the sun is or where the train is heading. Thank you.